I was exposed to it through my sister-in-law, who was a teacher in Adelaide, and she was involved in starting the Wollonga Waldorf School. This was before I had children. I just had a bit of exposure to, conversations and experiences with young children, like open days, just watching what my nephews were going through at school, and, the sort of passion and commitment that the sort of parents had to this education, and was a bit inspiring. And that was well before I moved to Alice Springs. And then when I moved to Alice, when people were talking about starting an independent school, I thought, well, that's my experience of an independent school, and I really quite liked it. And so I started looking into it more.
So you really came in at that point at the right time, because there had been this discussion, which a couple of people have talked about starting an independent school, and the conversation had actually veered strongly towards Steiner education, which is the point where you started fishing for interest in a Steiner school in Alice Springs.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a diversity of interests, I think, in that original group that were looking. Ellie Moss was interested in Montessori education. I think the Fitzroy model was floating around. I mean, I think that got opened up, and people had all different sorts of ideas. They thought, oh, well, if we're starting an independent school, it can be exactly what I want it to be. And I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I thought, if you're going to do this, it'd be good to have some sort of model to follow. And I guess that was the one I knew about. And I know Ellie Moss was quite interested in Steiner education as well. And then there were quite a lot of human resources on tap, actually, when we started looking into it, weren't there? People who were prepared to come to Alice Springs and do workshops and sort of mentor the school to a certain extent. So there was support there as well. Yeah.
So it was a bit like a case of where there was a will, there was a way, as it turned out. Did that surprise you, how quickly your idea took on?
Yeah. Yeah, well, there seemed to be a natural flow to it. I mean, I know that other group, put in an application for an independent school, and they were going to get government funding to do it, and then the funding fell through, so the idea fell through. And I think we were fortunate at the time. The Howard government came in. You had to have a minimum of 50 students to start an independent school, and John Howard's government changed that, so it allowed for the possibility of something growing organically. So you could start something small and see where it went and see what the interest was, and so that's what we did. And also, I'd had the experience of watching the school in Wollonga grow, and and then I visited the Mount Barker School in Adelaide, which was very well established, and you could sort of get a vision of the possibilities. Yeah. And I don't think it did grow that quickly at the start. I think there was a sort of a core group of people who came in who really liked this idea and were committed to it, and so they kept it alive really in the early days. I think it was hard for people to, you go to the school now and there's buildings there, and before that it was the idea of education, and it was the answers to questions about education that could be more creative and interesting for children, and have a broader sort of cultural and creative aspect to it that were really appealing, and then the teachers who made that manifest in the classroom.
And even just trying to crack that magic number of 50 seemed a daunting prospect at the start.
Absolutely. Yeah, it took a long time, I think, to build it, but in the meantime it was a really special time, I think, of making something together with a group of people.
Well, especially because there was a fascination and an interest in Steiner education, but really most of us knew very little about it, whereas most Steiner schools, as we later discovered, start with people who do know a lot about it, usually teachers. So that was a learning certainly a learning process, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. I think that was something that was quite different about the school there, and the fact that it was in Alice Springs and it was the sort of European influence on education and environment was not as, what would you call it, complete. There was a real sense of, this is desert country, and we're surrounded by desert people. It was a different environment to start a school in, and so there was a lot of interest, and I think there is, within the context of the Australian Steiner School movement, I think there was interest in, well, how do you bring these principles of education to life in this very different environment?